Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that speak to a diverse set of topics. We like to hopefully we can bring some things to light that maybe you haven't thought about, or at least we can provide some help if there are things that are keeping you up at night. Today is no different. We're excited to have Lynn Yap with us. She's been waiting quite some time, so we do want to say thank you for your patience very much. But Lynn is the founder of Actv8 Network, and that is ACTV8. I will spell all that out for you in the show notes. But the mission is to increase the participation of women in technology and entrepreneurship. She started her career as a corporate attorney, graduated from the Wharton School with an MBA, and worked in investment banking. Her curiosity led her to write about business as a force for good. The Altruistic Capitalist culminates conversations with leaders at for-profit corporations, entrepreneurs, and investors, and in her personal experience. Lynn, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for hosting me, Roy.
Yeah, this is I'm very excited to talk about this altruistic view, and it's becoming much more prevalent, as we talk about the employee side and the investment side and the consumer side. It's kind of like a triangle. But before we get off too far, tell us a little bit more about your story. I mean, how did you end up here? How did you, what made you decide to just focus on writing this book from this perspective?
Good question. Good way to start, I guess, from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I have a very traditional business background. As you said, I started out my career as a corporate attorney. I went to Wharton, and then I worked in investment banking. So very much a business focus. I help companies, I help tech startups raise public financing in the market. So I took companies such as Facebook public. But one day I thought to myself, we say people are our most important asset. But when I look at the rows of financial statements, there is nowhere in there that we measure the impact of what we do as a business on people and planet. Yeah. And so that kind of got me thinking, and started me on this journey really to look at business in a different way. I left investment banking quite soon after that and kind of explored different careers. I started volunteering as well and trying to find a cause and purpose that resonated with me. Long story short, I am where I am today. I started Actv8 Network after spending some time and years, helping to mentor girls into in technology and innovation and entrepreneurship. I started Actv8 Network. And then with the book, I also wanted to share what I had learned in all these years since I left investment banking. What is it that businesses can do to create a positive impact, not just on the consumers and for investors, because I think investors are still always important, but also for their partner suppliers and the community that they operate in, and of course the planet. So there are multiple stakeholders that a business has. And traditionally, if you look at business schools and business textbooks, it's all about the shareholder. It's all about the investor. It's all about the bottom line and making that and growing your profits year after year. It's not, I mean, your investors go crazy if you 1 year you say, well, it's not looking so good this year. Right. It's always about growing it again and again. Right. And so my whole journey in the last few years has really been thinking, okay, has been shifting. It's like, what else, how else should business be? Is there another way for businesses to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk about the Actv8 network too, a little bit, but I kind of want to, off of what you're saying is, I worked for a large public company back in the day, and we were a monopoly. So it wasn't a lot of competition, but then we had deregulation. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we were a smaller company that was public. And so we started living on the quarterly earnings cycle.
Yeah.
And mm-hmm. I was a young guy back then, and I didn't understand a lot, But what I found is that we were making some terrible long-term decisions
Mm-hmm.
based on this next quarterly report. All we were doing was living from one quarter to the next, and we were spending, we were saving $1 this quarter only to spend $10 next quarter. And I don't want to get off on a tangent. I want to try to stick to this topic, but I just read a list yesterday about 53 more like fast food and chain restaurants that are going out of that will probably be out of business. And one of them, not going to mention their name and run them in the ground, but it was just talking about, trying to relate it to COVID. And well, I want to write the author and say, this isn't related to COVID at all. It's related to poor service, to poor food, to dirty restaurants, everything but COVID. And so, I guess as the guy that's been on the ground, it's like, do shareholders really understand the dynamics and what's going on? We're just worried about that next quarterly report, but we forget all this other stuff that should go along
Mm-hmm.
with this business.
Mm-hmm. There's many parts of that that I want to pull on. And so going back where it was back in 1970 when Milton Friedman wrote an article in the New York Times, and he said the social responsibility of business is to increase profits. And it kind of went from there. This is what we're told in business school. It's what we're told in our business textbooks, and everyone just focused on the bottom line. But then on top of that is what you're saying. There's the quarterly earnings. Like you have meetings with your investors every quarter, and you have to show them what your estimates are, how far you are from them. What are you going to do to meet the next quarter? And on top of that, there's also other structural things such as executive compensation.
Yes.
It's also tied to all of this, estimates as well as financial returns. Thinking about your budget processes, everything is tied to just basically dollars and cents.
Yeah.
I see that shifting a little bit. I've seen a couple of headlines that now they're also starting to tie executive compensation to ESG, so environmental, social, and governance metrics. So what are some of the governance measures that you're setting up in your company? What are you doing in terms of environmental impact? Now, we're not talking just keeping within the confines of the law and like not dumping your waste in the rivers. We're talking like, are you using actually renewable energy? So thinking a bit more creatively and in a regenerative way in the economy. That is now linked to executive compensation. So that's one piece. And to answer in terms of the quarterly earnings, Rose Macario. So I mentioned two companies. I've mentioned a few companies, but in my book, I mentioned Rose Macario, who was leading Patagonia, as well as Paul Polman, who was leading Unilever. Both of them also post this quarterly earnings thing, because what it means is it's leading to what you said earlier, being short term. Mm-hmm. And what I believe how we can do that is to start setting out the vision for the future. And this is how Paul Polman did it. It's like, I want to double my financial, I want to double the business, but I also want to have environmental returns. Yeah. Now that means that I might not be showing you the numbers that you're looking for in the next quarter, but in like the 5 years, in 10 years, this is what I'm going to do. And there's some, I can't remember what the number is now. I think maybe the stock price fell by 10% or something the next day. Yeah. But over the tenure of when he was CEO, when Paul Polman was CEO of Unilever, I think the stock increased by 180%. So if you had stuck around, if you were an investor that believe in what he was saying, his vision, you would have got back your money. But there were also people who was like, this is not for me. And it really depends on the type of investor that you are and what your investment horizon is. You would have left the next day. And we're seeing the investment community also waking up and changing their perspective. The amount of assets under management that went into impact investing, so that's private money as well as into public funds, let's say ESG funds as well, that doubled, tripled in the last year. Partly because of the things that we're seeing related to climate change, to inequality, the people were speaking. Yeah. And investors are not just investors, right? They're also people like us with families who are consumers, who are members of community, and they said, well, okay, I also care about this, and it's important in the long run. It's better for business if we take care of the environment.
Right. Right.
Because if we don't take care of the environment, our materials and supply chain is going to be affected down the road. So,
Yeah. We can make that investment today and take care of the environment and do what we can. And we probably won't have to pay such inflated prices for those goods, further down the line. And I think that gets back to this long-term approach that, there's all kinds of investors. Some people want to get that, they want the daily bump and get in and get out,
mm-hmm,
which,
mm-hmm,
a lot of these announcements really affect. But then there's also there are people that they buy the stock, they want to hold it for,
mm-hmm,
I guess, as long as the fundamentals of it are good. And so these are the good decisions that I think comes out of this long-term play is that, okay, we will sacrifice some earnings today to impact future earnings so we can have, a good longevity. But anyway, and I think too, they're caught in this triangle that, they're being squeezed by employees because people coming out of college today, basically they're demanding that. What are we doing? How are you addressing my causes? We've got the investor groups that are like, I'm not investing or I'm pulling investing. And then we've also got the consumers because the
mm-hmm,
consumers are, voting with their dollars more and
mm-hmm.
more on the issues that really reach to them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so it's and again, none of us are sitting in one role. Like we're not just consumers, we're not just employees, we're not just leaders and managers of a business. We
Yeah.
are sometimes all of that, right? We're members of community. And so we are realizing the impact that businesses have on all areas of our lives, on the community, on the environment, and we want to make sure that there is a planet further down the road for our grandchildren, for our great grandchildren,
Yeah.
and that I think has really affected how us as consumers, like you say, we started voting for with our wallets,
Yeah.
and the younger generation for sure, they're so much more aware. I think for me, anyone can be a leader. I like to refer to the example of Greta Thunberg. 15 years old, she was sitting outside the Swedish parliament saying, enough is enough. What are you going to do about climate change? And I think leadership for me is having an opinion of something and really believing in it,
Mhm.
having the courage to talk about it and sharing it with others.
Yeah.
And so she had all of those elements, and she was persistent. She was she had the grit to continue to share what she believed, which then started the Fridays for the Future movement,
Yeah.
and that I think also raised then the awareness for that generation to say, yes, sustainability is an important thing. We need to take care of our planet because otherwise there won't be a planet later on for us.
Yeah. And, I think it's a good example too, because a lot of times, well, let's say when we vote here in the US, we feel like, I'm not taking the time to go vote today. I'm just one person. How can I really make a difference? And I think that she showed, when you take that stand and something that you really believe in, one person can have a pretty big impact on things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, collectively, it starts with one person standing up, and then another person stands up,
Yeah.
and then pretty soon we have a movement. If we go back way back in the 60s, for instance, we're talking about racial inequality. It just started with one person saying, "No, I'm going to stand up for what I believe is correct," and that's we live in a very different world today, and that
Yeah.
wasn't so long ago.
Yeah. No. So, what are some challenges that companies today face? I mean, we've talked a little bit probably about messaging and
Mm-hmm.
making investors understand what is our long-term plan, how is it a benefit to the environment, to the social impacts, things like that. And but are there other challenges besides that messaging?
Yes, I think there are many challenges, but perhaps and it all stems from everything around it, the structure, the mindset, the processes has been focused around business is in the responsibility. It has the responsibility to increase profits. Full stop. And that's kind of it, right? We just stop there. Short of like, if you don't break the law, you increase profits, you're all good.
Right.
And because of that, now there needs to be a big mindset shift to say, no, we are now, we want to focus on purpose and we want to create a positive impact. I think once you have that mindset within the company, within the business, in the leadership, and as well as on the ground, then culture starts to shift. Your values might shift a little bit, and then your processes will your strategy change, your culture, then your strategy, then your processes and your systems change, because you can't just go out and change, let's say, how you allocate budgets, how you want to whether you're allocating to training and development for your employees, or you're going to invest in renewable energy. I think it starts first from understanding yourself, from being mindful and intentional, and knowing what your purpose is. What are the values that drive you? And once you have that, that moves into your culture. When it goes into your culture, the strategy develops. Like, all right, this is where I can play. This is my field of play, and this is where I want to affect change. And everything else, I believe, flows after that. You might invest in different systems. You will change your processes. Your budget systems might reflect more in terms of the investment horizon that you're thinking at. And then, of course, the communication also changes. You might meet with your investors even more frequently than where you are right now, because you're telling them, look, you will be saying, this is how I am investing in the research and innovation to improve on the regeneration of energy for the business, for the supply chain. You might not be talking about earnings estimates, but you might be saying, this is what we're doing. Will you join us? How is it that you can help and play? I think that starts with that mindset, because now you are wanting to bring people along. When you realize you want to create a positive impact, you can't help but want to share that message with everyone else and bring others along with your journey. So that's how I see that you might actually end up meeting your investors more frequently than on a quarterly basis.
Which is not a bad thing, because you can keep them up. I think information is always powerful. So as an investor, the more feedback I get from you, the more comfortable I feel, versus if you disappear, or if I don't hear from you all quarter, maybe I start getting a little nervous, what's going on. So I think that's always a good idea. I guess the other question is, there's so many different aspects to environmental, social, that so how would you advise a company to make that decision? I mean, is it the CEO's passion? Does he want to do a survey of the employees and say, we're fixing to do, make some changes? What are some of your causes? Do you talk with investors? Or, I mean, I guess you probably, in an ideal world, you would get some ideas from all of these groups.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as well. And I think what you said is one of the ways in which we could do that. One of the persons that I interviewed for my book is Bill Simpson. He was the CEO of Hershey Entertainment, and so going back to what I said before, if you focus the team on the purpose of the business, then that is how you can engage with them and get them to bring their best selves to work. And what he did was he brought some of his top managers in a room, and he asked them. He went through the 5 whys exercise. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but basically it's like, why do we want to grow the business? And he asked why 5 times, and each of them gets to the point. Well, we want to help the Milton Hershey School. And that's a school for underprivileged children that Milton Hershey, the founder, started way back when the company was, when Hershey Confectionery was born. And so that has just continued. It's a free school for underprivileged children. It helps them gives them an opportunity for education for different career paths in their future. And so what he did was he asked them, he got them all, and they miraculously came up with the same answer. Well, it's because we want to help these children who are in a community. And this school is actually in, if you've ever been to Hersheytown, it smells of chocolate, and the school is actually it's a fantastic magical place, and the school is actually in that community. So I mean, they could have, like you said, focus on the environment, focus on governance, focus on inequality, the water, clean oceans, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
But I guess going back to what is important to them and what they are good at, what is closest to them, I guess. It could be what their strengths are, right? And this is something they've worked on, and it's very close to the team. And so this was their purpose.
Okay.
I can give another example as well in terms of purpose.
Okay.
Hubert Joly was the CEO that was brought in to turn around Best Buy. If you remember, a number of years ago, I think it was 2012, Amazon was knocking at the gates, and Best Buy was bleeding money, losing a lot of sales. Analysts said, shut the stores, fire your people, and call it a day. Of course, Hubert Joly comes in and says, no, any people-related expense, that will be a last resort. And what he did was he focused the people on their purpose. And the purpose is enabling, enriching the lives of others through technology. That was the purpose that they came up with. And how that translated from the purpose into the strategy was his team then took that purpose and interpreted it and say, well, we want to help the elderly community in our the elderly in our community. We want them to help them live longer and more independently, and in a safer way. So what that resulted in was they, of course, saw a lot more connected devices, things like Google Home and Alexa. There were more notification devices, so that if anything would happen, the authorities would be warned, and help would come their way. And there was also mobility, support, technology, everything that would help the elderly in the community and the vulnerable to be able to live on their own more independently and for longer. And so that, that's how purpose actually translates into strategy, and even found them a new, I guess, target niche consumer group that they were not necessarily focused on before. And all of a sudden that, when they focus on the purpose, they found their niche. They found where they could really create a positive impact. And the other side of that story is, remember I said Amazon was knocking at their doors? And so what he did was, traditionally, what people would do is competitors in the same field would be fighting. They will invest a lot of money, throw a lot of money, basically to kill the competition.
Right.
Instead, he said, hey, we have physical stores. You're basically online, Amazon. Why don't we work together? You have a bunch of devices that would help our customer. So why don't we help you sell Alexa in our stores? And that basically helped the two of them. Instead of, again, wasting resources to kill the competition, they made 1 + 1 = 3. And so they grew the business, and they were, they collaborated essentially, which is the other part of altruistic capitalist mindset. When you collaborate with others in your industry or adjacent industries, I think that's another way where you can create a positive impact for the environment and for communities.
Yeah, and well, first off, I was going to say maybe the Best Buy can help my mother with her remote. She seems to have a lot of trouble keeping that thing working, so I may send her over. Yeah, I think that we, unfortunately in business, we take that view of it's a zero-sum game, and in most places, there is enough out there for all of us to be winners that we should, especially when we talk about smaller companies, but even with the larger ones, we can work together in ways to actually, like you said, make 1 + 1 = 3, not have,
Mhm.
a duel to the death where in some instances, both companies end up being hurt dramatically. But
Yeah, there is absolutely no need to duel to the death.
exactly, exactly, because that doesn't, consumers get, they get tired of hearing those messaging as well, instead of thinking about these partnerships and how they can help each other as we,
Mhm.
and um, I think that's also too good that, that we help the different groups. There's so much need out there, and if we just have an open mind as businesses about where we can serve our community, we really can't go, if we do it correctly, we can't go wrong with that messaging.
Right. And maybe to add to that, maybe if we also collaborate and partner with people within our industry on common problems. So, for instance, fashion companies that work together to find a way in which to to use recycled fabrics, or to develop new materials in which there is less need to use virgin material,
Right.
because everyone has that same problem. Reducing waste, reducing landfills, reducing the clothes that we dump in our landfill. So there is a fashion alliance where fashion companies get together and talk about these problems. So you're united in the common enemy, which is climate change.
Right. Right. So, how do we scale these activities? Because I'm just telling you my opinion. As the CEO, we've come up with this great mission or a good community that we can serve. But then, how do we try to decide? How much resources, and that could be money, cash, direct, or it
Mm-hmm.
can be. There's a lot of instances today which I am in favor of, is giving employees so much time, 2 4 hours a month, to go out and serve in something that they feel, that's really their passion. So how do we kind of walk the line between trying to scale these activities, but yet, being mindful we have a business to run and we do have
Mm-hmm.
to actually turn a profit?
Yes, very, very, very good question. I think important to always remember, in doing good, we still need to make money, because you cannot you cannot create a positive impact unless you maintain financial discipline. So I'm very grateful for my business background. I understand the things that you need to do in order to be financially responsible, because let's not forget about that. If you're not financially responsible, you don't have a well-run business, and you cannot then make the changes and scale the solutions that you're talking about.
Right.
And I think one way in terms of scaling your solutions and the impact that you're doing is to have collaborations, to have partnerships with others in adjacent industries, and share, because we all have complementary assets and skills that we are not all good in one thing. But if we share what we're good at and find complementary partners, I think that can really help scale the impact that we have, and find people who have the same values, who want to solve the same problem. That, for me, is one way, and to be open about it, to be vulnerable, and not say this is what I want you to do. And that goes the same for partners, for people we collaborate with, and also with employees. Like, this is the problem that we want to solve, and this is what we have. How can we do it?
Yeah.
And leave it to that.
No, I think that's a good point. We don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. There's other organizations that are
Mhm.
very good at doing whatever they do, that we find a way that we can support them, to further their mission as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, going back to also being mindful to let go of that ego, to wanting to put your name on everything. Because if we collaborate, I mean, we're think about the impact that we have, that we could have if we collaborate. So instead of wanting, yeah, I want my name on this and this and this, and I'm just keeping everything to myself, what could you uh, achieve if you let that ego go?
Yeah. So you talk about, the other thing that you talk about a little bit is grit, and I love that. There was a good book not long ago written about, it was basically on how we look at people. Is they have good skills, this time, but sometimes it's that third component of grit, of just
Mm-hmm.
finding a way to grind it out, finding that way to be successful above, all other things. So talk a little bit about that in the purpose-driven business model.
Mm. So, grit, as Angela Duckworth defined it in her book, grit is passion plus perseverance. And I see if you start off with your purpose and being mindful, then you are focused on the one thing instead of, well, I've got like these 10 things that I want to look at. You
Yeah.
know what you're, so you already have your target, you have your goal, and you have, you know what you're going to focus on. And then the perseverance part, I describe that as being like the athlete. And even if you're not in a team sport, even if you're a runner or you're a marathon runner or something, how you build perseverance is by training with others. And taking that to the business world, if we build partnerships and coalitions with others, this helps us see, hey, the problem is not so big after all, because we have all these other people working on it with us. And of course, then you share your knowledge, you give each other feedback. And it's the same in sports, working with others. That helps both of you get to your destination, get to your end goal quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that, and thank you for mentioning her name. I love that book because it's a concept that, unfortunately we don't look at. We tend to look at what's tangible
Hmm.
on piece of paper, but then there's always this grit factor that it means the difference between success and failure a lot of times.
Hmm. Exactly. Starts with a mind. Starts with a mindset.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, let's transition and talk about Active8 for just a minute. Tell us a little bit about the importance of increasing women in technology and entrepreneurship.
So how Activate Network started was I was very much involved in technology startups. I would go to different conferences and different events, and oftentimes I would be one of the few women standing in the room. And that's the same when I'm in conversations about innovation and technology. I find myself like the lone voice, and it was sometimes uncomfortable. So I would sometimes silence myself. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to shift that. And kind of I wanted to have more women involved in that conversation because there is half the population that we're not listening to. And think about the diversity of opinions that we have that could result in better products.
Right.
What I mean, this is another mindset that I talk about in my group book. Be curious, ask questions. What are the assumptions behind what we're saying? So that's the same with increasing diversity. If we ask questions, if we include the other in in our conversations, in our problems, in our global issues, we will be able to come up with better solutions.
That's a common problem that I see in businesses is that, what we call a homogeneous group, and it turns into group think, which can
Mhm.
turn us down the wrong paths. And that's why, diversity is so important because we need everybody's viewpoint to make our product or service better. And,
Mhm.
we can't segregate that and say, well, it's just, this one brain trust over here. They've got all the answers. We need to get what is your thoughts and feelings on the way that we deliver a service or how you use our product. There's
Mhm.
so many questions that we need to be asking to a diverse group.
Yeah, because if you also create a product by a certain group, you're only selling to that group. You're missing out on this whole other group that you could be selling to.
Right.
So why not make something that is inclusive for everybody?
Right. Yeah, and I find my life is my partner Terry. I find my life is better when I fall in line and do what she says. Anyway, so I think that's a message that we could spread that women come from a different place, and usually it's that nurturing, caring side, and so we need that, especially when we talk about the altruistic capitalist point of view. is, we can't just always be income statements and balance sheets and just uh, strict, concise business all the time. I mean, we have to think about these other things, and what better way to do that?
Yeah, we can't stare at the bottom line the whole time. And the good thing is, I believe that in the next, my prediction is that will change in the next 2 or 3 years, where it becomes mandatory reporting to report on your diversity metrics. What are you doing in terms of investing in people in the community? What are you doing in terms of regenerating the economy, redistributing the resources around you? What are you doing in terms of governance? How is it that you're running or managing, governing your business? So I think these are good things that are coming down the pipeline. I predict and I hope, which will really shift the way in which businesses are run.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to advocate that message. I think it's only that it's we can only better ourselves, our local environment, and the world in general. We can only make it better by implementing these things. One thing I will ask: how do we how do we measure the change or the success? And I guess there are metrics that'll be set out before people invest capital, dollars or human capital. But also, as an investor, a company tells me they're doing this certain thing. How can I be sure that they are actually doing it and that it actually is making a difference?
Mm. Very deep question.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple of layers to that. I think in terms of knowing the impact that a company is making, the stakeholder capitalism metrics that the World Economic Forum proposed way back in September of 2020, I think what that does for investors, the investor community in general, it aligns the impact for across companies. So it becomes like GAAP reporting or IFRS type reporting where it's standardized. And so I can compare apples to apples across businesses and across industries. So that's one thing. And the second thing, I think, with investors, how would they really know? I think is to want to have these conversations regularly instead of, you know, show me your report card on a quarterly basis. It's like, tell me what is it that you're doing? How are you seeing that shifting? And so having more authentic and real conversations about the long term and what they're doing right now with the management instead of just saying, hey, show me your report card. Like,
Right.
did you meet the estimates that you told me last
Yeah.
quarter?
And we can also get involved. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that
Mm-hmm.
we can get involved with companies, even if we don't work for them, to help on these different missions that they're on. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that there are actually some investment managers that they look at maybe a social or environmental issue and they invest to that. So, I mean, that's a good way to help, is to have professionals that are kind of looking down over that if you're really concerned about that.
Yeah, Larry Fink actually is very big on the impact investing on environmental, social, and governance type investing. Yeah.
Okay, cool, cool.
Yes.
All right, Lynn. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful speaking with you. This is a great message, not only the Activate, getting more women participation in technology and entrepreneurship, but also on the altruism capitalist, investments in, what is it, environmental, social, and governance changes that can help the world around us, the people around us, the employees within the company. Uh, so much great. It's a good start. And I think that there's a lot, like I said, it's kind of like this triangle where companies are getting a lot of pressure from employees, investors, and consumers, that maybe we can make some big changes in the years to come. That would be great.
I
Yeah.
hope so, definitely.
All right. Well, before we get away, do you have a habit, or is there a tool that you use daily in your professional or personal life that you just can't do without?
Hmm. I I have a few habits, particularly in the morning, that I like to start off with. I will share one in particular,
Okay.
and that is journaling. I,
Okay.
I write every morning I think that really helps me to be more mindful and also to reflect on what is important to me. Because it all starts, I believe everything starts with the mindset. And the structure that I have with my journal is what what have I learned? What would I like to learn or experiment with? And so one of the things that I'm trying to what I'm experimenting with right now is intermittent fasting, for instance.
Okay.
Um, and the other thing is, what are my triggers? What is it that comes back? So, for instance, even with my book, it came back different times. I didn't just wake up a year ago and said, "Okay, I'm going to write a book right now." It was actually multiple seeds that were planted over the years. Like, "Hey, Lynn, why didn't you write a book?" And then, and one of them just before I finally pulled the trigger and said, "Okay, I'm going to write a book," was a friend of mine said, "Hey, I've got a publisher for you." you know,
Oh my God.
do you want to talk to the publisher or not?
Yeah.
So those are the three questions that I write in my journal every day, or I reflect on in my journal. What is it that I've learned? What is it that I would like to learn? And what are the triggers that keep recurring?
Interesting. I journal. I've tried for years, but I kind of like on and off. But the last 6 or 8 months, I've been pretty well on. And so, but I think that's a good point to have that structure, something to write to every day that'll be of benefit. And the other question I'd ask too, like, how do you feel like journaling helped you to write the book, writing every day? Because I've heard
Mm.
writing is just like a muscle that we have to exercise and you have to build it up. And so, writing in a journal every day, uh, did that really, did it make it easier for you when you started putting the book together?
Uh, Fair question. I don't think journaling helped me necessarily. I think it's in part me setting aside time and saying, all right, I'm going to have time to reflect and meditate daily, and that's like 15 minutes for journaling. And what I did and it was a similar thing with my writing process. Uh, I set aside every Sunday. So it would have been very hard to reach me in that period and that in that year when I was writing the book to contact me on Sundays because that was my writing day. I would do all my research and all my interviews and calls and meetings during the week. And then on the Sunday, it was when I synthesized everything, when I processed everything and I put it out in a written form. And that was my process. You couldn't get me on a Sunday. It helped that it was COVID as well, so there was nowhere to
Right,
go.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. No, that's good because there's so many people that have so much great information, want to get their ideas out, but it's that,
Hmm.
that blank page it can be an antagonist for sure. And then also, I think that's good setting aside the time. I
Hmm.
just encourage everybody to really get your message out there. You can
Right.
take that time to really put it down because
Ye-
that's how we learn. I mean, I think this is uh, a great movement that you're talking about here that doesn't get a lot of press. We hear more and more about it, but the more people that write about it and talk about it, the better off we are for a lot of things. So, all right.
Yeah.
Well, tell everybody, how can they reach out? How can they get involved, or how can they reach the Active 8 network? And then also, how can they reach out and get a copy of the book, or reach out and talk to you?
Well, people can write to me at lynn@altruisticcapitalist.com. Write me and I'll send you a signed copy. And then there, you can also reach me there, of course, to talk about Activate Network. And the same if you would like to keep up on news as I continue to research and talk about the topic. So again, altruisticcapitalist.com is the website, and you can email me at lynn@altruisticcapitalist.com.
All right. Awesome, Lynn. Well, thank you so much for your time. We certainly appreciate it. And I will ask you to, keep up, come back on, give us some updates as you work through this process. We certainly appreciate that.
I love to. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Roy.
Okay. You bet. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, I am your host, Roy. You can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We are on all the major podcast platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. We'd be glad to get that added to make your listening easier. We are on all the major social media networks, probably hang out on Instagram a little bit more than other places. and a video of this interview will go up when the episode goes live. So go over to our YouTube channel, check that out. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.